Hi, third graders. So we are going to start where we left off in Finding Freedom, Writing Freedom. That's the name of it. And where we left off, Charlotte told Hay that she had to run away. She was no longer allowed to help out with Vern in the stables, and Caleb was getting adopted. So she knew she just had to get away. Some of the problems that she knew she was going to face was that girls were not allowed to be unchaperoned without someone to watch them. So if she was a boy, she would be able to be out walking around without anyone. But because she's a girl, she has to have someone to watch her. So we're going to find out how she solves this problem. Okay, Writing Freedom, and we are going to start chapter 3. Charlotte, you look nervous as a cat, said Hayward. Charlotte looked around to see if anyone was watching. She took the bundle he was holding and stuffed it in the wood box behind the kitchen. It's all there, Charlotte, everything you asked for. The overalls, the cap, the boots, everything. Please be careful, Charlotte. Thanks, Hay. I don't know what I'd have done without you. Hayward was ready to leave. His new family was waiting around the front. Charlotte tried to look at him, but she couldn't. She looked at the ground. Charlotte, how will I know where to find you? I'll know where you'll be, she said. I'll find you again, I promise. Anyway, I've got something for you to remember me. Charlotte took a narrow piece of leather out of her apron pocket. But that's your bracelet, said Hayward. Why is this piece of leather so important to Charlotte? It's the piece that she had in her hands when she was in the accident when she was a baby, right? The horse's reins that were in her hands. So it's really important to her. So the fact that she is willing to give some of it to Hay means that he must be really important to her. But that's your bracelet, said Hayward. No, I cut it in two, long ways. See? Charlotte held up her wrist. The leather that she had worn since she was a baby was half as wide. She tied the other half around Hayward's wrist. He was quiet and his eyes were wet. He put his arms around her and buried his head against her apron. Charlotte held him and ruffled his hair. She felt sick inside, like she'd swallow something spoiled. Now, get along. They'll be looking for you. Hayward straightened up. Muddy streaks ran down his face. Goodbye, Charlotte, he said, walking backwards, still looking at her. Goodbye, Hay. I'll find you. We're going to have a ranch, remember? With big old sign that says private property, remember? And foals every spring. Foals are baby horses. She couldn't finish. She choked on the tears as they spilled down her cheeks. She tried to stop, but she couldn't. They just flowed a river down her face until she couldn't see him anymore. I bet she's pretty sad to lose Hayward. It sounded like he was kind of her only friend. Charlotte sat behind the wood box for nearly an hour. She felt achy and empty. Silent, her tears spent, she looked out over the pastures and wondered where she'd be tomorrow. It would be easy to stay here and just go about her business. At least she'd know where she'd be sleeping every night. She'd have regular meals, but she wouldn't have the things she loved. What did Vern always say? That the easy way ain't always gonna get you anywhere. Let's think about that for a minute. The easy way ain't always gonna get you anywhere. So sometimes if you take the easy way, you're not gonna get where you wanna go. You're not gonna accomplish what you want to accomplish, what you want to do. Sometimes the easy way just puts you one step ahead, but not to your final destination. Mrs. Boyle's voice startled her. Charlotte, do I have to come out there and get the wood myself? You're good for nothing, and slow as molasses. Charlotte jumped up and gathered the wood and carried it into the kitchen. She didn't want Mrs. Boyle getting her dander up and poking her nose in the wood box. Not today. When Charlotte walked back into the kitchen and saw piles of potatoes waiting for her, she realized that as nervous as she was about running away, she was more afraid to stay. Something bigger than peeling potatoes was nagging at her on the inside, but she still needed help to make her plan work, and there was only one person left who she considered her friend. Who do you think the last person is that's her friend? Vern always ate dinner in the kitchen, so afterward, when he came out to the kitchen steps, Charlotte was waiting. Well, Miss Charlotte, I already been missing you, and those horses already missing you too. Charlotte put her finger up to her lips and waved Vern away from the back steps. When they were safely out of Miss Boyle's earshot, Charlotte looked at him and gathered her courage. Vern, where would somebody pick up a stage around here? A stage? So a stage is like a stage coach. It's like a wagon that travels. This is back before they had a lot of trains. There were no planes, there were no cars. So to travel from one place to another, you would hop on a stagecoach. A stage, well, the southbound picks up in Concord every Tuesday and Saturday morning. So there's one coming tomorrow. You remember Concord. You rode over there with me to pick up some feed. That's about all I know. Why? What are you up to? How much does it cost? Asked Charlotte. Vern studied her. Well, it costs some dollars to get a body to the next stop, but that ain't very far. You got money for a stage ride, Miss Charlotte? Vern, you know I ain't got no money, but I got to leave. I ain't no good to stay here. I ain't got no good cause to stay here. The only reason they keep me is to take Mrs. Boyle's place in the kitchen. Worried furrows crinkled up Vern's forehead. Running away is a might dangerous thing to do, said Vern. You ran away once, said Charlotte. Vern tilted his hat back on his head and looked at her. Yes, I did. I never knew my mama or papa, just like you. I ran from the south to the north, and all I left behind was being anybody's slave. But when I ran, I had folks that helped me and hide me. You're a girl, that's different, said Vern. It ain't that different, said Charlotte. Vern looked at her and then towards the kitchen. Well, maybe you're right. If anybody would wither and die in a kitchen, it's you, he said. She straightened her shoulders and looked at him directly. I'm going, Vern. He shook his head, then lowered his voice to a whisper. Miss Charlotte, anybody know your intentions? No. Almighty, you keep it that way. Vern looked around to see if anyone could hear her. Now you gotta make it look like lots of things could have happened to you, so folks won't know which way you went. And you need to look different. I already got that figured out. I just bet you do, said Vern. I need a pair of scissors tonight, said Charlotte, and some money for the stage. I could pay you back, not right off, but down the line. I don't know what you have in mind, Miss Charlotte, and it better I don't, 'cause Mr. Milshark, he'll be asking me about you first thing. I'll try my best to get you those things. You be careful, you hear me? You be real careful. You're heading for Concord, right? So let 'em think so let 'em think. You know I can't read a scratch. So when you get through the woods and come to the town sign, you pile some rocks up around the base of that sign. That way next week, when I get the feed and I see those rocks, I'll know you made it that far. I'll be worried sick till then. Charlotte smiled at Vern. She would have hugged him too if she hadn't been worried about Mrs. Boyle walking out of the kitchen any minute. She couldn't let anyone think that Vern might have helped her. Thanks, Vern. I wish I could stay with you and work with the horses, but I'd be in the kitchen and I'd be missing Justice and fretting 'cause I wouldn't get to see Charity's foal or help you name it. I know, Miss Charlotte, said Vern. You gotta do what your heart tells you. I won't ever forget you, said Charlotte. I'm guessing I'm not likely to forget you, Miss Charlotte. And don't you worry about Charity's foal. I got a name all picked out for that one. And you did help me. Just came to me. A fine name that stands up real good. Fittin' for a fine horse it will be. That foal's gonna be named Charlotte's Pride. Charlotte lay in bed in her clothes until after midnight. She thought about Hayward, sleeping in his very own bed in his very own house with his new family. She wondered what that felt like, knowing you were home, knowing there were people in the very next room who cared about you. Charlotte had never had that she could remember. Never had a home or people that worried about her or cared about her. Don't forget me, Hay, she whispered in her pillow. When Charlotte was certain that everyone was asleep, she got up and plumped her pillows and laid them in her bed, covering them with the blankets, so it looked like she was still sleeping. She crawled out of the window and sneaked into the woodbox. Although the night was clear and bright with moonlight, the woodbox was in shadows. Had Vern come through? Charlotte opened the box. Inside was Hayward's bundle of clothes. She strained her eyes in the dim light, and there, in the corner, was another smaller cloth bundle, tied with a string. She looked back toward the barn. Thank you, Vern, she thought. She grabbed the two bundles and ran as fast as she could until she was beyond the far pasture. The road to Concord was on the other side of the woods, and she would have to hurry to get there by morning. In the safety of the trees she unwrapped Vern's bundle. He had put the money in a little leather pouch, and there was a sandwich and the shears, the scissors, that they used to trim the horses' manes. But more than that, the cloth they were wrapped in was a worn piece of a shirt that had been crudely hemmed the size of a large kerchief. One side of the kerchief still had the original buttonholes. Charlotte rubbed it over her cheek. She could still hear Vern saying, "You gotta do what your heart tells you." She found a pool near the fast-moving stream. Then she untied her ribbons, unbraided her hair, and shook it hard. It surrounded her shoulders like a woman's shawl. She leaned over and looked at herself in the water. "Goodbye, Charlotte," she whispered. With a trembling hand she picked up the scissors and cut off a hank of her hair. With every snip, long locks landed in the water and floated downstream in the strong current. She had never cared all that much about her hair, but now she ached for it as it disappeared. She dropped her hair ribbons into the water, and like silky snakes they drifted away too. Why is she cutting her hair? Why do you think she is cutting her hair off? Let's find out. When Charlotte stood up, she was surprised at how light-headed she felt, as if those braids had been holding her fast to the ground. She quickly changed into Hay's clothes and put the sandwich and the money pouch in the big pocket of the overalls. She folded Vern's makeshift kerchief and tucked it into another smaller pocket. She took one last long look in the pool. The water reflected the image of a young boy. So she cut her hair off so that people would think she was a boy, because boys have more freedom. They can go without being questioned as much. Quickly, Charlotte stuffed her frock, her dress, and the scissors in the stump of a dead tree, covered them with damp leaves, and brush. She floated her apron in the stream, wrapping the strings around the nearby tree brambles so it wouldn't drift away. Make it look like different things could have happened. If anyone came looking, they'd see her apron and think she had drowned. Charlotte cut through the woods and arrived at the main road to Concord, with the moon still high. She ran until she got tired, then walked and ran some more. The stage came early, she reminded herself, but her side had a stitch from running, and she slowed a little. Mrs. Boyle would be fussing when Charlotte didn't show up for her breakfast chores on time, but she'd be too busy to come looking herself. Eventually, she sent out one of the boys. He'd seen the bed with what looked like Charlotte inside and tried to wake her. The boy would report back that Charlotte was missing. And then Mrs. Boyle would be furious. She'd march straight to Mr. Milshark. Charlotte held her side and started running again. She could not miss that stage. So Charlotte has made it look like something has happened to her. She's gone, but they'll find her apron and think maybe she drowned. No one knows she cut her hair except for Vern, and I don't think Vern's going to tell. Do you? All right, let's see if she makes it to Concord next time.